My mom's voice echoed through the room, sharp and heavy, as though each word was designed to pierce straight through me. "You'll always be a burden," she said, loud enough for every pair of eyes to shift toward me. The laughter at the dinner table died instantly. Forks froze midair. I felt my chest burn, my throat tighten, as if she had ripped the ground right from under me in front of our entire family. I had spent years swallowing her comments, hiding behind polite smiles, convincing myself that silence was strength. But this time, the words wouldn't stay trapped inside. My hands trembled as I placed my fork down, the sound of metal against porcelain cutting through the silence. Everyone was waiting for me to cry, to run off, to play the role of the weak child again. But instead, my voice rose, steadier than I thought possible. "You've called me a burden my whole life," I said, my eyes locking on hers. "But maybe the real burden is carrying around the weight of never being enough for you." Gasps rippled through the room. My aunt pressed her hand against her mouth. My cousin stared at me wide-eyed. "And my mom," she blinked, her lips parting just slightly, as if no one had ever dared to speak back to her. The silence after my words stretched long, so long that I wondered if I had gone too far. My heart hammered in my chest, and yet a strange calm washed over me. For once, I wasn't the quiet shadow in the corner. Then my mom leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. "Careful," she said, her tone low, dangerous, the way a storm builds just before it breaks. But before she could continue, my grandfather, who had been sitting at the head of the table in silence, cleared his throat. His voice, cracked with age but sharp with authority, cut through the tension. "Enough," he said. "Tonight we will hear truths, not just wounds disguised as love." Every head turned toward him. My mom's face stiffened, but she didn't interrupt. My pulse quickened because I realized something. This wasn't over. This was only the beginning of a reckoning that had been waiting for years. My grandfather's eyes fell on me. "Tell us," he said slowly, "what you've held inside all this time." And for the first time in my life, I knew I was being given permission, not just to speak, but to finally be heard. I took a deep breath, every memory, every scarred word, rising to the surface, demanding release as the entire room leaned in, bracing for what would come next. I looked around the table, at the faces frozen in anticipation, and I felt the weight of years pressing against my chest. My mother's glare was sharp enough to slice me in half, but my grandfather's steady gaze held me together. For so long I had carried these secrets like stones in my pockets, heavy and hidden. Now they were clawing their way out. "You want to know?" I said, my voice trembling, though I refused to look away. "I'll tell you. Do you remember when I was 12 and Mom told everyone I was too stupid to make it in school? I stayed up every night after that, studying until my eyes burned, just so she wouldn't call me that again. Do you know what it feels like when the person who's supposed to believe in you convinces you that you'll never be enough?" A low murmur passed through the table. My aunt shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. My mom's lips curled into a thin smile, the kind she used whenever she felt cornered but refused to admit it. "You're exaggerating," she said, her tone dripping with venom. "Always playing the victim, twisting things to make me look bad. Haven't I given you food, a roof, everything you needed?" My chest tightened. "You gave me survival, Mom. Not love. You gave me criticism, not encouragement. Every achievement I had was met with silence or with another insult about how it wasn't good enough." My voice cracked, but I pushed through it. "You made me feel like I had to earn the right to exist in your house." Gasps spread again, softer this time, filled with shock and disbelief. My cousin shifted her gaze from my mother to me, her eyebrows pinched in concern. My grandfather's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes were on fire with something fierce. I wasn't done. My whole body shook, but years of swallowed words surged forward. "Do you remember my high school graduation?" I asked, my throat tightening at the memory. "You sat in the back on your phone the entire time. I walked across that stage looking for your face, looking for just one smile, and you didn't even see me. Everyone else had their parents cheering, clapping, taking pictures. I had an empty seat in my heart where your pride should have been. The words cracked out of me, raw and jagged, and I saw my mother flinch for the first time. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. My uncle coughed into his napkin, clearly uncomfortable, but my grandfather raised his hand, silencing any interruption. "Go on," he said to me, his voice stern but not unkind. Tears stung my eyes, but I wasn't ashamed. For once, I felt them as proof of survival, not weakness. Every day, I carried the feeling that I wasn't wanted, that everything I did was a mistake. And I thought if I stayed quiet, if I worked hard enough, if I became perfect, maybe, just maybe, you'd finally see me. But nothing was enough. Nothing ever is it? I turned to face her fully now. "You say I'm a burden. But what about the burden of never being loved by your own mother?" Table was suffocating with silence. My mother's hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her jaw clenched, her chest rose and fell rapidly. For the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes, something close to fear. Then she laughed. A brittle, sharp sound. "You think you're the only one who suffered?" she snapped. "You think I had it easy? I worked 2 jobs to keep this family afloat. I sacrificed everything, and this is how you repay me, by humiliating me in front of everyone." Her words sliced through the air, but this time they didn't pierce me. I straightened my shoulders. "No, Mom. You didn't sacrifice for me, you sacrificed for control. And the cost was me, my childhood, my self-worth, my belief that I was lovable. You can paint yourself as the martyr, but deep down you know the truth." Her face went red, and she slammed her hand on the table, making dishes rattle. "Enough!" she barked. "I will not be disrespected like this." But before the tension could explode further, my grandfather's voice thundered across the room. "Sit down." His tone was so powerful, so commanding that even my mother fell silent. His eyes burned into her as he spoke. "For years, I have watched you tear down the people around you to mask your own failures. Tonight, your child has spoken the truth. And whether you like it or not, you will hear it." My mother froze, her mouth still open as if she wanted to argue, but no sound came out. Her gaze darted around the room, looking for allies, but none of the family moved. Even my aunt, who always defended her, sat with her lips pressed tightly shut, avoiding her eyes. Power in the room shifted, and I felt it like a current humming in my veins. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one shrinking into silence. I wasn't the one carrying the shame. I could see it now, sitting heavily on her shoulders where it belonged. I drew in a shaky breath. "I'm not afraid anymore," I said quietly, but the words carried, steady and sharp. "You can keep calling me a burden if you want, but the truth is, you're the one who's been afraid all along. Afraid to admit that you didn't know how to love me. Afraid to admit that maybe the problem was never me. It was you." Her eyes locked on mine, burning with rage, but behind it, just for a second, I thought I saw something else. Something raw. Something broken. The table sat in absolute stillness, every member of my family waiting, holding their breath, wondering what would happen next as the storm between us grew darker, heavier, seconds away from shattering the fragile silence completely. Her lips pressed into a thin line, the faint tremor in her jaw betraying the fury she was trying to hold back. I kept my eyes on her, refusing to flinch this time. Every second stretched longer than the last, like the world itself was leaning in to witness what would happen next. The chandelier above hummed faintly, the only sound besides the uneven rhythm of my breathing. Finally, she leaned forward, her voice low but dripping with venom. "You think you're brave now, embarrassing me in front of everyone? You're nothing without me. Nothing. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't even have this roof over your head." I swallowed hard, my throat raw, but my voice came out steadier than I expected. "Maybe that's true. Maybe you gave me walls and a roof. But do you know what a child needs more than that? A safe place. A voice that says, 'I'm proud of you.' Arms that hug instead of push away. You gave me everything except the one thing I begged for, your love." The words echoed, and for a moment no one moved. My cousin's fork slipped from her hand and clattered against her plate. My aunt shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between me and my mom, as though searching for a way to interrupt but too afraid to speak. My mother's chest rose and fell rapidly, and then she laughed again, a hollow sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Love? Don't talk to me about love. I didn't have that luxury when I was your age. Do you know what my own mother said to me? She told me I was worthless, that I would never amount to anything. Do you have any idea what it's like to grow up with that?" Her words cracked, jagged and sharp, but I felt the shift immediately. For the first time, the mask she always wore slipped just slightly. Beneath the rage was something raw, something desperate, though she fought to bury it. I blinked at her, my anger wrestling with a surge of something I hadn't expected, pity. "So you decided to hand that pain to me," I said softly. "Instead of breaking the cycle, you passed it down. You hurt me the way you were hurt. You made me pay for what someone else did to you." Her eyes flashed, and she looked ready to spit back another retort, but her lips trembled before she pressed them tightly together. The silence grew heavier, pressing down on everyone at the table. My grandfather leaned forward now, his voice rough but steady. "She speaks truth," he said. "And you know it. Pain doesn't excuse cruelty. You had a chance to choose differently. You did not." My mother's gaze snapped toward him, her face twisted with betrayal. "You don't understand," she hissed. "You never did." "I understand more than you think," he replied, his tone grim. "I was there. I saw how your mother treated you. And yes, it was cruel. But I also saw the bitterness take root in you. I saw how you let it grow until it poisoned everyone around you." The weight of his words landed like stones. My mother's expression cracked, a mixture of rage and shame flickering across her face. She looked around the table again, but no one rushed to her defense this time. My aunt avoided her eyes, my uncle stared down at his plate, my cousin's lips pressed tightly together. Her breathing quickened, and for a moment I thought she might finally break. But instead she straightened her back, her voice turning cold and sharp again. "So what? You all think I'm the villain here? You all want to gang up on me?" I shook my head. "No, Mom. I don't want to gang up on you. I just want you to see me. To really see me. Not as a burden. Not as a mistake. But as your child who has been waiting his whole life to feel loved." The vulnerability in my words seemed to stun her more than the anger had. Her lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. Her hands trembled on the edge of the table, gripping it so hard her knuckles were white. My grandfather's eyes narrowed, studying her with a mix of disappointment and sorrow. "This family will no longer live under silence," he said. "Tonight masks fall. If there is truth to be spoken, it will be spoken. If there are wounds, they will be named." He turned his gaze back to me, nodding slightly as if giving me permission to continue. My heart pounded, but I felt a strange clarity now. "You've told me I'll always be a burden," I said, my voice firm. "But the truth is, I carried your anger, your resentment, your unspoken pain for years. I carried it in every insult, every cold glance, every moment you ignored me when I needed you most. That wasn't my weight to carry. It was yours. And I'm putting it down tonight." My words seemed to echo in the silence that followed. My mother's face crumpled for just a fraction of a second before she forced it back into hardness. But I saw it. Everyone saw it. The crack in her armor. For the first time in my life, I felt taller than her, not because I had hurt her, but because I had finally spoken the truth. The room felt different now, like air after a storm, thick with tension but charged with possibility. Till no one moved. My aunt looked like she wanted to speak but swallowed the words back. My cousin leaned forward slightly, her eyes wet with unshed tears. My grandfather sat rigid, his gaze fixed on my mother, waiting. And my mom, she stayed frozen, her face locked in a mask of anger, but her eyes betrayed something fragile, something fighting to stay hidden as the silence stretched longer, waiting for her to either break or to lash out once more. Her nails tapped against the wooden table, a nervous rhythm she probably didn't even realize she was making. The sound filled the silence, sharp and uneven, like a clock ticking down to something inevitable. She shifted in her chair, her shoulders stiff, her mouth pressed tight, and I could see the war behind her eyes. Everyone was still. Even the candles on the table seemed to burn lower, flickering shadows across the walls as though the house itself leaned in to listen. My chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, my own heart hammering so hard it was painful. I wanted her to say something, anything, but all I got was that sound of her nails against the wood, tapping, tapping, tapping. Finally, she exhaled through her nose, short and sharp. "You think words change anything," she muttered. Her tone wasn't the thunderous rage I expected. It was quieter, bitter, almost weary. "You think sitting here and throwing all this in my face fixes what's broken?" Her words landed heavy, and I clenched my fists under the table. I almost fired back, but something about her voice made me stop. She wasn't shouting now. She was retreating, hiding behind that shield of cynicism she always carried. "I don't think this fixes anything," I said carefully. But silence doesn't fix it either. All my life I kept quiet. I carried the pain. Tonight I won't do that anymore. If this breaks everything, then maybe it needed to be broken. Her eyes snapped to mine, and for the first time that night they didn't burn with anger. They shimmered with something rawer, something almost like fear. She opened her mouth, closed it, then shook her head. "You don't know what you're saying," she whispered, almost to herself. "I know exactly what I'm saying," I replied, leaning forward slightly. "For years, I begged for scraps of kindness. Do you remember when I brought you that drawing in elementary school and you laughed? You said it looked like a mess. I cried myself to sleep that night and you didn't even notice." Her face twitched, a flicker of memory crossing her features, but she tried to push it away. "That was nothing," she said, her voice sharp again. "Just a drawing." "To you, maybe," I shot back. "But to me, it was everything. Every small moment piled up. You may have forgotten, but I never did. Every word, every dismissal, it carved me into the person I am now. You don't get to call it nothing." Table was so quiet it hurt. My aunt blinked hard like she was fighting tears. My cousin wrapped her arms around herself, staring down at her lap. My grandfather stayed still, his jaw tight, his hands folded in front of him, his gaze unmoving. My mother's tapping stopped. Her hands dropped to her lap, and she leaned back, staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "So, what do you want from me?" she asked finally. "An apology? Do you think that erases everything?" I swallowed. The easy answer would have been yes, but the truth pressed heavy in my chest. "I don't want an apology you don't mean," I said slowly. "I don't want words. I want you to admit it. That I was never a burden. That the problem wasn't me. That I deserved better." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her throat worked as if she were trying to form the words but choking on them. I watched her wrestle with something inside, a battle between her pride and her truth. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. And then, in a voice barely audible, she said, "You did deserve better." The words hit me like a blow, not because they hurt, but because they cracked something open inside me. My chest tightened, tears stung my eyes, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. She looked away quickly, ashamed, but I had heard it. Everyone had. The silence that followed wasn't suffocating this time. It was heavy, yes, but different. My aunt let out a shaky breath. My cousin blinked rapidly, tears spilling down her cheeks. Even my grandfather's shoulders softened slightly. I gripped the edge of my chair, my voice unsteady. "Then why couldn't you show it? Why couldn't you just love me the way I needed?" Her face crumpled for half a second, raw pain flashing across her expression, but then she masked it again, covering it with a scowl. "Because I didn't know how," she admitted, her tone sharp, defensive, but trembling underneath. "I never learned. No one ever showed me. And by the time I realized, it was too late." Her confession hung in the air like smoke. My stomach twisted. Part of me wanted to rage, to scream at her for every missed chance, every cruel word. Another part wanted to crumble into that small child who had begged for love and never received it. "You think that makes it better?" I asked, my voice breaking. "You think that makes the scars go away?" "No," she said quickly, almost desperately. "I know it doesn't. But it's the truth." For a moment, neither of us looked away. It was as though the whole room had vanished, and it was just her and me, mother and child, two broken pieces that had never fit together. Her eyes glistened with something she refused to let fall, and I felt my own tears slide down my cheeks. My breath came uneven, and I shook my head slowly. "You don't get to call me a burden ever again," I said, my voice low but firm. "Not after tonight. Not after everything I've carried for you." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Her silence was an answer in itself. The air in the room was thick, charged, the atmosphere fragile as glass. No one dared to move, as though the smallest sound might shatter what was unfolding. My grandfather finally leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, his eyes moving from me to her and back again. But my mother didn't move. She sat frozen, trembling, her walls cracked but not yet fallen. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak but couldn't bring herself to say the words as the silence stretched, heavier, deeper, waiting for whatever came next. Her hands trembled in her lap, though she tried to still them by gripping the fabric of her dress. The flickering candlelight cast deep shadows across her face, and I caught a glimpse of something I had never seen before: fragility. For so long she had stood as a wall, unmovable and sharp, a fortress that nothing could penetrate. Now there were cracks, faint but undeniable, and through them I saw the faint glimmer of a woman who wasn't invincible at all, but deeply wounded, deeply afraid. No one at the table dared to speak. My aunt kept dabbing at her eyes with the corner of her napkin, as if afraid that even the sound of her sniffle would break the spell. My cousin sat so still she looked carved from stone, her gaze locked on my mother as though she were watching a wild animal cornered, unsure if it would lash out or collapse. My uncle cleared his throat once, nervously, then looked down at his plate again, ashamed of the silence that had stretched over years, not just tonight. "I never asked to be perfect," I said finally, my own voice hoarse from holding back the weight of everything inside me. "I just wanted to be seen, to be loved. And every time you pushed me down, every time you said those words, burden, mistake, it was like another piece of me disappeared. Do you even know how many nights I lay awake, wondering if I should even exist?" Her head jerked up at that, her eyes widening just slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to go there. But it was the truth that had been locked in my chest for years. My throat burned, and I forced the words out even as tears blurred my vision. "Do you know what it's like to be a child and think the world would be better without you? 'Cause that's what your words did to me. They made me believe that my very existence was wrong." The silence was suffocating, yet alive, heavy with the soundless reactions of everyone listening. My cousin covered her mouth, her eyes wet with tears she didn't bother to hide. My aunt whispered something under her breath, a prayer maybe, as if the pain in the room was too much to carry. My mother's lips parted and her voice trembled as she whispered, I didn't know." "Yes, you did," I cut in sharply. "You saw me withdraw. You saw the way I stopped talking, stopped smiling, stopped trying. You saw and you ignored it. Because it was easier to call me a burden than to admit that you were the one failing." The words shook the air like thunder, and for once she didn't have a retort ready. She blinked rapidly, her breath uneven, and her shoulders sagged as if the fight was finally leaving her. My grandfather shifted slightly in his seat, his eyes narrowing but his expression unreadable. "You don't know what it was like for me," she said finally, her tone weak, desperate. I was drowning too. Every day I fought just to keep us afloat. And every time I looked at you, all I saw was another weight I had to carry. I know that's not fair, but it's the truth. Her confession stung, piercing deeper than her insults ever had. My chest tightened, my throat closing around the words I wanted to say. So that's it, I whispered. That's what I was to you, a weight. Not a child. Not your child. She flinched, her face twisting with pain, and she looked down at her lap again. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of the old clock ticking in the corner filled the room, steady and relentless, each second a reminder that this was real, that it was happening, that the silence of years was finally unraveling. My grandfather's voice broke the stillness, low and firm. She is no weight. She is flesh of your flesh, blood of your blood. If you could not see that, then it is not her who failed you. It is you who failed her. My mother's shoulders hunched as though his words pressed physically against her. She shook her head slowly, her lips trembling, her pride visibly warring with something softer, something more human. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted in a near whisper, her voice cracking. I swallowed hard, my hands clenched into fists beneath the table. Maybe you can't fix it, I said, every word heavy. Maybe all you can do is stop breaking it further. Stop breaking me. Her eyes lifted toward mine, and for the first time she didn't look like a giant towering over me. She looked small. Her chin wavered, her eyes glistened, and her face twisted as though she was trying to hold back years of words she had buried deep inside. I don't know if I can be what you need, she said finally, her voice so fragile it barely carried across the table. But I swear to you, I never wanted you to stop existing. I didn't mean for you to feel that way. I was angry, bitter, broken, and I took it out on you. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was closer than I'd ever gotten. My chest ached, torn between fury and relief, between wanting to scream at her for all the years I lost and wanting to cling to the faint spark of honesty in her words. Tables seemed to pulse with the weight of it. My cousin sniffled quietly, wiping her cheeks. My aunt pressed her napkin to her eyes. My grandfather closed his eyes briefly, as though the pain of watching this unfold was too much even for him. But I couldn't let the moment slip away. Not when the truth had finally cracked through her armor. I leaned forward, my voice steady but low. Then say it. Say I'm not a burden. Say it to me here in front of everyone so I can finally believe it. Her eyes widened, and for a long moment she said nothing. The silence was unbearable, the air thick and trembling with tension. My heart pounded in my ears as I waited, every second stretching longer, heavier. She looked around the table, at every face watching her, at every set of eyes demanding truth. Her lips parted, her breath shaky, but the words refused to come. She clenched her fists, trembling, caught between the pride that had ruled her for years and the crack in her heart that had finally been forced open. The room held its breath, every soul waiting, every second thick with the possibility of something breaking loose, as her voice trembled on the edge of the truth that had been buried for far too long. Her mouth opened, but all that came out at first was a shaky inhale, like she was swallowing glass. Her chest rose and fell too quickly, her composure slipping with every second of silence. The whole table seemed to lean forward as if gravity itself was pulling us all toward her next word. My pulse roared in my ears, and I felt myself gripping the edge of the table so hard that my knuckles hurt. Last, her voice broke through, cracked and unsteady. You're not a burden. The words were fragile, almost whispered, but they struck the room like a thunderclap. My cousin gasped softly, my aunt pressed her hand against her lips, and even my uncle lifted his head at last, staring at my mother with disbelief. My grandfather didn't move, his gaze fixed on her, his expression as hard as stone. I sat frozen, unable to breathe, my throat burning with tears I refused to let fall too quickly. Through all these years, I had finally heard the words I had begged for in silence. And yet, instead of healing me, they ripped me open wider. Say it again, I demanded, my voice raw, shaking but unyielding. She blinked rapidly, her face pale, as if she hadn't expected me to challenge her again. Her lips trembled, but she forced the words out, louder this time, firmer. You are not a burden. I closed my eyes for just a moment, letting the sounds sink into me, into every scar, into every sleepless night when I had believed the opposite. But when I opened them, I saw her staring at me, and the weight of everything she had done still pressed against my chest like a stone I couldn't lift. Do you know how long I waited to hear that? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. How many nights I lay awake wishing you'd just walk into my room, sit on my bed, and tell me those exact words. I was a child, Mom. A child. And I had to teach myself that I was worth something because you wouldn't. Her face twisted, shame flickering across it, but pride still clung like armor. I didn't know how, she repeated, more desperate this time, her tone breaking. I didn't know how to be soft. I thought pushing you would make you stronger. Stronger? My laugh came out bitter, sharp. You didn't make me strong. You made me terrified of being weak. You made me afraid of failing, of speaking, of existing. I didn't learn strength from you, I learned survival. Do you understand the difference? She flinched as though my words were a blade, and for a fleeting second, her eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. The room was heavy with grief that didn't belong to just me. My aunt sobbed quietly, muffling the sound in her napkin. My cousin stared at her mother, then at mine, her expression torn, as if she was only just realizing how deep the scars in our family ran. Even my grandfather's hand trembled slightly as it rested on the table, though his face stayed firm. You always thought silence was strength, I continued, my voice firmer now, words spilling before I could stop them. But all silence ever did was let the hurt grow. I broke tonight because I refused to be silent any longer. And you, my voice caught, but I forced it out, you're still hiding behind it. Even now. My mother shook her head violently, her breath unsteady. I'm not hiding. Yes, you are, I interrupted, louder than I intended, my voice echoing in the room. You always have. You hide behind anger, behind work, behind your own pain. You hide so well that you forgot who I was. You forgot I was a person. Not a chore. Not a mistake. Your child. Your flesh and blood. Her eyes flickered, breaking for just a moment before she looked away, staring down at her lap as though she couldn't bear the weight of my gaze. The silence stretched long again, heavy enough to choke. My chest burned, my throat tight, but I refused to look away. Not anymore. Finally, my grandfather spoke, his voice grave. She has given you the words. But words alone are not enough. You must show her. My mother looked up at him, startled, almost pleading. I don't know how, she whispered, her voice breaking. Then learn, he said sharply, his tone leaving no room for argument. It is late, too late, but not impossible. Her breath hitched, and she looked at me again. For once, she didn't wear the mask of defiance. She looked bare, stripped of her defenses, a woman who had built walls so high she had trapped herself inside them. Her lips parted as though she wanted to say something more, but her voice caught in her throat. As she began, then faltered. She pressed her trembling hands flat against the table, her eyes locked on mine, desperate, scared. I don't know where to start. My throat ached, tears slipping silently down my cheeks, but I didn't look away. Start by seeing me, I whispered. Really seeing me. Not the weight you thought I was. Not the mistake you convinced yourself of. Just me. That's all I've ever wanted. Her face crumpled, pain twisting every line of it. She looked down again, shaking her head slowly, as though the weight of what I had asked was heavier than anything she had ever carried. Her fingers clenched against the wood of the table, digging into it like she needed something to hold her up. The silence in the room was so sharp it rang in my ears. Everyone was waiting, for her, for me, for something to break through the years of damage. My aunt's quiet sobs filled the edges of the stillness, my cousin's shaky breathing, my uncle's restless shifting, but still no one spoke. My mother lifted her head again, her eyes wet now, her lips trembling with words she hadn't spoken in decades. She leaned forward slightly, her whole body taut, and in that moment the air itself seemed to vibrate with the weight of what she might say next. Her lips trembled, shaping words that seemed to dissolve before they could leave her mouth. Her eyes, glossy and red-rimmed, darted across the table, searching faces as if hoping someone would rescue her from what she had to say. But no one moved. The weight of silence pressed in from all sides, forcing her to face me, to face everything that had been avoided for so long. Her voice broke out, ragged and uneven. "I don't know how to be the mother you needed." Confession tumbled into the air, raw and unpolished, nothing like the controlled sharpness she usually carried. "I don't know how to undo what I've done. Every time I try to think of the right words, they feel like lies because I wasn't there the way you wanted me to be. I was angry. I was bitter. And I let that poison everything." The words landed heavy in my chest, half victory, half pain. For so many years I had dreamed of her saying something like this, but the reality wasn't clean or healing. It was jagged, filled with holes, like a net that couldn't catch the years I had already lost. My breath caught, and I pressed my palms flat against my thighs to stop them from trembling. "Then why say I was a burden?" I asked, my voice thick, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "Why was that the only thing you ever gave me freely? You could have been silent. You could have walked away. But you looked me in the eye over and over and told me I was a weight you didn't want. Do you know what that did to me?" She winced, a visible flinch, as though my words had struck her across the face. Her fingers twisted in her lap, desperate and restless. "Because," her voice broke and she looked down at the table. "Because when I looked at you, I saw myself. The part of me that wasn't wanted. Part of me my own mother said was worthless. And I hated it. I hated seeing it again. And I took it out on you." Gasps rippled around the table. My cousin covered her mouth with her hand, my aunt's sobs grew louder, and my grandfather's jaw tightened so fiercely I thought he might break his teeth. I sat stunned, her words slicing me open even as they revealed the truth I had suspected for years. "You hated me because you hated yourself," I whispered, my voice trembling. Tears finally slipped down her cheeks, the mask crumbling completely now. She nodded once, a sharp, pained movement, as if admitting it cost her more than she could bear. "Yes." The word reverberated through me, more cutting than any insult she had ever thrown. For a moment my chest felt hollow, emptied of everything except the echo of that single word. My breath shook, my whole body trembling, but I forced myself to meet her eyes. "You don't know what it's like," I said, tears spilling freely now. "To be a child and think the one person who was supposed to protect you couldn't stand the sight of you. You don't know what it's like to grow up believing your very existence was too much. And hearing you say this now," my voice cracked, "it doesn't erase any of that. It just proves I was right. That I really wasn't wanted." Her face collapsed, grief spilling across her features, and she shook her head violently. "No. No, you weren't unwanted. I wanted you. I did. Her words tangled, breaking apart. I didn't know how to show it. And by the time I realized, the words were already out, and you looked at me with those eyes, and I knew I had ruined it. And I kept doing it anyway because I didn't know how to stop." Her hands lifted helplessly, palms open as if she were surrendering, as if she were finally admitting defeat against years of her own demons. Her voice cracked again, softer now. "I failed you." "I know I did." I stared at her, my heart torn in 1,000 directions, rage, sorrow, relief, longing. My tears blurred her face until she was just a trembling shadow across the table. My breath came out uneven, shaking. "You did," I said finally, my voice low, each word heavy. "You failed me. You failed me when I needed you most. And I don't know if I can forgive that." She covered her mouth with her hand, stifling a sob, her body shaking as though the truth itself was too much to bear. Her shoulders hunched, and for the first time in my life, she didn't look like the towering figure who had ruled every room. She looked small. Broken. My grandfather leaned forward then, his voice stern but carrying the weight of sorrow. The harm cannot be undone, but it can be faced. The question is whether you will face it or run from it again. All eyes turned to her. She sat trembling, her hands still pressed against her mouth, her breathing uneven. 4 long, painful seconds she didn't answer. Finally, she lowered her hand and whispered, "I don't want to run anymore." The words were barely audible, but they shifted something in the air, something fragile and electric. My cousin began crying openly now, my aunt bowed her head as if in prayer, and my uncle rubbed his face, muttering under his breath. I sat frozen, my heart raw, my body shaking from the weight of years spilling into this single night. My mother's eyes clung to mine, desperate, pleading, as though everything in her life depended on what I would say next. But I couldn't speak. Not yet. My chest heaved with sobs I hadn't released, my throat clogged with words I wasn't ready to form. I lowered my gaze, staring at the table, at the flickering candles, at the shadows that danced like ghosts of the past still clinging to us. The silence returned, thicker now, more suffocating, as though the entire room was caught in the fragile space between destruction and healing. My mother reached her hand forward across the table, hesitant, trembling, stopping halfway as if she were too afraid to close the distance. Her fingers hovered in the air, shaking, waiting, while every pair of eyes in the room fixed on me, on her, on the space between us where the years of pain still lived, waiting for the moment that might shatter or save everything. Her trembling hand hovered in the space between us, fragile and uncertain, as though it carried the weight of years unspoken. I stared at it, frozen, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it would drown out the silence. That hand had struck me down with words 1,000 times before. That hand had pushed me away, waved me off, dismissed me like I was nothing. And yet here it was now, reaching, not to wound but to bridge a chasm that had nearly swallowed me whole. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I thought of every sleepless night, every whispered cry into a pillow, every time I begged the universe to give me the mother I longed for. I thought of how many times I had waited for this, something as simple as her reaching for me. And now here it was. My chest burned with anger and longing, with grief and a fragile, trembling hope. Slowly, I lifted my hand, my fingers shaking as they hovered above hers. The table was so silent it felt sacred, the air charged as if the universe itself leaned in to watch. When my fingers finally touched hers, a shiver ran through me. Her skin was warm, soft, shaking just like mine. And in that moment, the years of silence cracked, splintering into something new. She broke first. A sob tore from her chest, raw and guttural, echoing off the walls. Tears streamed down her face, unstoppable now, her mask shattered into pieces that could never be rebuilt. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." The words ripped through me, tearing open wounds and stitching them at the same time. They didn't erase the years. They didn't undo the scars. But they mattered. They mattered because for once, she wasn't the storm towering above me. She was human, broken, vulnerable, admitting what I had needed to hear my whole life. Tears spilled down my face, my body trembling as though it was finally releasing decades of pain. My voice shook as I whispered back, "I needed you. I always needed you." Her sob grew louder, her whole body shaking as she gripped my hand tighter. "I know," she cried. "I know, and I failed you. I see it now. I see you. And you were never a burden. Never." The room dissolved into silence, broken only by her sobs and my shaking breaths. My aunt cried openly, clutching at her chest. My cousin wiped her eyes, her gaze filled with something like awe. My grandfather closed his eyes, his weathered face lined with both pain and relief, as though he had waited his whole life to see this moment. I didn't forgive her instantly. The wounds were too deep, the scars too old. But in that moment, I realized forgiveness wasn't a single act. It was a choice, a process, a door I could choose to open. And for the first time, I wanted to try. I squeezed her hand, my tears falling onto the table like rain. "I don't know if I can forget," I said softly, my voice trembling but steady. But I will try. You try too. No more silence. No more walls. Just truth. She nodded through her tears, clutching my hand like it was the only thing keeping her from drowning. Truth, she whispered. I promise. And in that moment, something shifted. The weight I had carried for so long began to lift, not completely, not magically, but enough for me to take my first breath without chains. The storm that had raged between us for years had broken at last. And though the ground was still wet with tears, I knew something new could grow there, something fragile, yes, but alive. The room, once suffocating with silence, now hummed with something different, hope. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't finished. But it was a beginning. And sometimes beginnings are the most magnificent endings of all.